Welcome to the New Masculine Podcast. This is a place where masculine identifying people come together in community to disrupt outdated models of masculinity and together construct new models for our way forward as men. As a special note, while this conversation is between men, this podcast values all beings and seeks to create positive impacts for all. I'm your host, Travis Stock. I am a master life coach, an equus coach, which means I often partner with horses when supporting clients, and I'm a teacher. In my coaching work, I am passionate about the balance of masculine and feminine energies in each of us, regardless of gender. I seek to help others nurture a relationship with both types of energy, which often leads to a greater sense of wholeness. And yet what I found in my work with men is that many of us have been taught messages about what it means to be a man by first teaching us to avoid anything that is associated with the feminine. That avoidance leads to few experiences of intimacy, emotions outside of anger, vulnerability, or even a sense of belonging. Striving to comply with these models of masculinity has many of us feeling isolated, ashamed, unworthy, afraid, angry, and depressed. That's why I started this podcast, to bring men together who are ready for something new, something more whole. In last month's episode, we chatted with a United States Air Force captain and psychologist about men's mental health and modernizing masculinity. It felt inspiring and insightful to hear from a man whose identity straddles both traditionally masculine space we often associate with the military and the more internal exploration of mental health and well-being. And today, we're lucky enough to continue learning from a man who similarly lives between those worlds. Christopher Lee Maher is a former Navy SEAL turned mental health expert who focuses on helping others identify and move through the fight-or-flight responses that prevent them from reaching their full potential. Look, there are many elements of our current world that lead to stress. And over time, that stress, if not resolved, begins to accumulate and wreak havoc on our lives. But Christopher is here to teach us how to not just manage that stress, but to truly resolve it. On a personal level, he identifies as a teacher, as a healer, and as an artist. So let's continue our learning from men who infuse the lessons from their military training into the well-being work they offer to others by welcoming him into the new masculine. Thanks for joining me, Christopher.
Happy to be here. Happy to serve.
Oh, I love that element that you're happy to serve. I would imagine sort of your military training kind of infused some of that into your life. I'd love to hear a little bit more if there's anything that feels important as a way of identifying who you are, as people getting to know you before we jump into the meat of this conversation.
I mean, I'm unique in one sense and the same as everyone else, right? Here on Earth, in the middle of some very chaotic times, and looking for as many opportunities as I can to show up and serve others and to serve myself powerfully and find people who can come in and impact my life in a positive way.
I love that balance because I think as someone who's similarly inspired to help be of service to others, I can sometimes lose that element of being of service to myself as well. And so I love that you hold those both as really important and powerful.
Yeah, I mean, in this time when I was watching something, maybe it was like on Joe Rogan or one of these podcasts where they're talking about toxic masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was being raised, I never viewed masculine as toxic and feminine as non-toxic, right? In my experience, feminine was more toxic because it was given permission to be excessively emotional without any without any guard post, right? To hold them in. So I have been actually at the effect of toxic femininity.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's the reality of any kind of energy is that it can come from a profane or toxic kind of place. I think you are pointing to something that our culture is having a lot of conversations more around the toxicity of masculinity. On this podcast, we don't choose to use that kind of language. I don't necessarily know that shaming people is a really great way to help heal and transform the ways we engage in our relationships with each other. But I do respect that there has been some reasons to call out bad behavior in this world. And I think that we all have our own versions of what has felt toxic or traumatic to us in our lives and has shaped who we are. I'm really curious to know some of the stories, more of the details of the stories that you're sort of sharing around what it was like growing up as a boy in this world for you.
Yeah, I mean, my work, so it's clear to the listener, is that I take people who have basically been in the world, are very successful. Most of my clients are entrepreneurs or professional athletes or uh, diplomats, or they're doing something extraordinary, and yet they reach a point in their life where they realize that something is in their way. Something, even though they have the professional success, emotionally there's something off, meaning that their anxiety is too high, or they're suffering from insomnia, or digestive issues, or debilitating headaches, or an inability to communicate or authentically self-express and be transparent with their wife. There's all these other things going on underneath. And as I start to pull back the curtain, what do I find that's consistent in every one of those cases? Children that grew up in a toxic environment. And whether it was the father or it was the mother, we relate things in a neutral fashion. And what I mean by that is this. My background is in traditional Chinese medicine. So my study has been understanding the extremes of energy and then taking that traditional Chinese medicine meridian theory map and laying it over a being so we can figure out why they're operating at an extreme level. And in every single one of the cases, we always find the same thing. There was some level of toxicity happening in the home while the child was between the ages of womb and 13, and they were modeling and compensating for these toxic patterns in their environment. And if we look at my life, and the reason why I'm able to help these people so efficiently is because I grew up in a household where there was a lot of toxic femininity. And I had a mother who felt unsafe to be in the presence of males. And of course she did, right? She went through her own set of emotional and sexual trauma and felt abandoned by her own mother and drank heavily here and there, ate heavily, and switched between two personalities, Tinkerbell, full of excitement and energy, and Godzilla. And she could turn into Godzilla in 0.02 seconds, and then she could turn back to Tinkerbell in 0.01 seconds without ever understanding the impact of that on a young boy. And my mother chose to take her life when she was 29, right? The emotional stress and the toxicity that she dealt with was too much. She had no tool to get back to neutral, to begin to understand why she went through what she went through. And there were no answers. There were no support systems then in the early 70s for women who went through traumatic things like that. And my mother was told very clearly that this is what men are like, and she should get used to it. And so that message being passed on to her was, hey, masculine energy, men are toxic, and this is what you have to deal with.
Wow.
And so that was a tenuous environment to grow up in because I was always walking on eggshells.
Yeah. Yeah, as I
right?
was listening to you, I was imagining what an impact that would have on a child's nervous system to constantly have this sort of fluctuation between Tinkerbell to Godzilla back and forth,
For
and
sure.
not learning how to regulate because you can never predict what's about to happen.
Yeah, like you don't know, like when the key goes in the door, you have no idea who's arriving
Mm-hmm.
home, right? And imagine what? So my mom's 27. I'm 5 years old at that time. Is she getting work that's bringing a satisfactory income home? No, because guess what? In the 70s, men were paid a much greater wage for the same level of commitment to their professional life.
Mm-hmm.
And so my mom had struggles from all ends, energetically, emotionally, spiritually, financially. And so there was a lot of depression in the field, right? There was a lot of anger, a lot of frustration. And when you grow up in an environment like that, you have to figure out how to adjust so you can stay out of the free fall that's happening around you with your mom. And that's unfortunate because who's there to make the little boys and the little girls feel safe at home with clear directives in an open, spacious environment?
Mm.
Well, in the 70s, the moms were because the dads were at work, right? Look, it's 2023. Things are obviously different now.
Yeah.
Yet that's the environment that I was raised in. And a lot of people that I work with are somewhere between the ages of like 25 and 65. And so they went through some layer of this. And the older they are, the more extreme the environments were. I was watching a TV show last night, and I was explaining this to a friend a week ago. And in the TV show, um, the man grabs the woman and just slaps her, right? And this is black and white TV. Okay, so this show was probably from the 60s. And that was acceptable behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And she does her dramatic, like, oh, Rick, I'm so sorry. I think I really love you. And I'm thinking, hold on. These are the messages that we were receiving through
Uh-huh.
TV
Yeah.
of like, yeah, if you're a masculine man and you're a really feminine woman and she disagrees with you, you just slap her, you grab her by the wrist, and you walk out the door anyway. And by the time you get to the car, she'll be in agreement with your perspective.
Right. Because her role is to acquiesce in that moment.
Yes,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
Yeah. And I'm looking at this and I'm going, I cannot believe we still turn on the TV and have to watch this. But yet I was raised in an environment where that's what was on TV. Right. And I think about all the meta messages that were coming through from my mom and her behavior, but also from the environment through TV, through magazines. And I was born the day that JF Kennedy, uh, not JFK, the day that Robert F. Kennedy died.
Mm.
Okay, so you can imagine what it was like coming into that energetic envelope, especially as an
Seriously.
African American child, right? Where Robert F. Kennedy was what? He was the hope of the African
Mm-hmm.
American people. And to see him snuffed out and to be born in Philadelphia, right? An African American city, and have that message come through the day I'm born, right? So I'd say growing up was probably difficult emotionally.
Yeah.
And I can see why I do the work that I do today and why I'm as effective as I am because of my commitment to growing beyond my own limitations and serving myself powerfully so that I can serve others.
Mm. Yeah, I'm so glad you're bringing up this topic around sort of like childhood experiences and trauma at early ages, because I think that that's what I find in my work. Prior to becoming a coach, I was an investigator for Child Protective Services. So in the home, looking at abuse and neglect in homes. And there's so much to be said about what do we imprint on, what do our blueprints for relationships become from our early experiences that we then carry into our adult lives. And I think we live in a culture that's like, oh, you just kind of get over it and move on, and we don't ever actually address what actually happened to us and really address the sort of behavioral and thought patterns that were created as a way of surviving something like that. And so we end up being adults moving through the world with adaptive strategies that were created in early childhood, before the prefrontal cortex of the brain was fully formed, before we understood abstract thought in certain ways. And so much of my work ends up being like, how with people is, how do we take a look at what those adaptive patterns were that we created at those times, look at how they are either serving or not serving us at this point, and learning to adapt them, learning to evolve them so that they no longer are, it's that like 3-year-old child that's running the show that's trying to just protect us and keep us safe. So I'm really glad you're bringing this up, because I do find in all of my work that some of those early childhood experiences are some of the most impactful places that people can really focus on and transform their relationship to themselves and the world through.
I mean, this is why I like the title of your podcast, The New Masculine, right? Because for me, in order to create a new masculine opportunity, men have to be willing to look back.
Yeah.
And go, okay, hold on. I have these things going on with my relationships today. What was the cause of those? Right? Like what situations was I in that were beyond my capacity to process effectively at an emotional level? And how do I overcome or transmute and transform those childhood dynamics so that I can experience what I want as an adult with my rational mind, as opposed to being controlled by my irrational self.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think one of the things that makes that challenging to do for a lot of men is that so much of our socialization of men is like to feel pride in what we've overcome and moved beyond, and it didn't affect me to remain like sort of emotionally stoic to the things that happened in our lives. And I would argue in that was a coping strategy that you maybe needed at that time, but it may not serve all of us to remain sort of emotionally disconnected from the challenging experiences that we went through. I don't necessarily advocate for getting stuck in them, but to be willing to look back and see what couldn't I address at that time that I now might have space to address now.
Yeah. Yeah, we're in this very interesting time where this was something that I think women did naturally. And, you know, the men in my life growing up, I went to a privately well-endowed boarding school in Hershey, Pennsylvania, named Milton Hershey School. And the men's role in that institution was to get up in the morning and make sure that we did things correctly. And either through demonstration themselves or getting an older student to demonstrate for us, and making sure that we were on task, on time, and on point. And so from that perspective, the male role models that I had were very good for me. Right? It was, the men never crossed my boundaries. You know, it seemed to me that a man's life was very simple then. Get up, go to work, come home, work a little bit at home, go to bed, and do it all over again. And, you know, through the mind of a child, it seemed pretty easy to me.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Like Mrs. Akins She bakes the cookies. Mr. Akins, he mows the lawn. Mrs. Akins, she makes the Kool-Aid. Mr. Akins paints the barn. It was like she had the roles in the kitchen. He had the roles to take care of stuff outside. And it was very consistent in terms of role play.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I got a lot of my information about how to be a male from watching those men at the boarding school show up every day and be consistent with how they related with their role.
You had so many challenging experiences as a child that were in the context of your relationship with your mom, and so I heard you sort of labeling toxic femininity, and then also having your mom's death be a part of your childhood experience,
Yeah.
and then being in a school with certain male role models that seemed to serve you and that created structure and clear role definition that helped. Some of that can help us feel safer in the world. We know what's expected of us. We know what to do, what not to do. I would imagine there's a journey that you went on as a young man, like as you were like a teenager, a young man, whenever you decided to join the Navy SEALs, to get to this man that you are today that's sort of practicing Chinese medicine and being of support to others. I'd love to hear, how did those early experiences, like what did it create for you in your lived experience as a young man?
Hmm. Um, what's interesting about my situation at boarding school and the SEAL training and the SEAL teams is that in boarding school, there were 16 boys in a student home and there were 4 officers. Um, and in the SEAL teams, there's 16 guys in a platoon and there's 4 officers.
Interesting
So,
parallels.
so boarding school prepared me for the experience that I had in SEAL training and the SEAL
Yeah.
teams, and made a lot of things easy
Mm.
because um, in the military, there's basically a merit system, right? And in boarding school, we had a merit system. So um, you're constantly being judged by your performance, right? Your performance is your attitude. Your performance is, did you take care of your chore? Your performance is, did you make your bed correctly? And in boarding school, making your bed correctly. And then when you first entered into the military is like a big thing. Why? Because they want you to pay attention to details, right? And so they use making your bed in your locker, they use that as an opportunity to see where you're at in your development in terms of your ability to pay attention to the smaller details in life. And if you can, if you can get your bed right, and you can get your personal space right, meaning clean, organized, um, and structured in a way that makes logical sense, and you can apply those strategies to life, then life gets very easy.
Mm.
And I think I'm happy that I didn't grow up in a household where there was no structure, because even though I disliked, in fact, I could even use the word hated doing all those excessive chores when I was 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 years old. I could promise you today that if you put me up against the average person, no matter what the job is, I will enjoy my work. Because I enjoy and I value organization, I value completion, I value discipline, I value all those things that I think are essential for a man or woman to gain satisfaction from one's life.
Hmm. I love hearing how consistent sort of like your socialization in some of the key portions of your life. Like most of us learn a lot about how we need to be in the world in our home, our family of origin. We learn it in school, and we learn it in some of our early like career training. And so in some ways, like you got that message of discipline and structure and order in each of the different areas of your life. Doesn't mean that there weren't some challenges and some spaces that you hated as a child, but you got this consistent messaging about who you needed to be as a person and what creates simplicity and success and well-being.
Yeah, and they let you know based on your attitude,
Mm-hmm.
because one of the merits that you got every day was, did you have a good attitude or did you have a poor attitude? So it's one thing to get up and make your bed in a good way, okay, and clean your room, and then show up to breakfast with a bad attitude. Well, now you got a demerit. Well, guess what
Mm-hmm.
happens at the end of the week? At the end of the week, your privileges for the weekend are based on the merits or demerits you got that week. And so now other kids are having more freedoms. And at one point, I think I was started really struggling in 10th grade. I started pushing back against the system. And then I got more demerits and I got extra chores to do. And so that created a lot of rebellion, right? I started to get in touch with the heretic aspect of my personality. And I took that to its edge. And then the school pushed back at me and said, hey, this is not acceptable. And you can continue to operate like this, but guess what? You're going to have an extra hour of chore every day. You'll have no privileges on the weekend. And when everyone is enjoying themselves, you'll be sitting in a corner. No book, just sitting in this chair. And let's see how much you enjoy that. And then one day I woke up and I was like, yeah, I think I'm done with this exploration of pushing back. I'm in a system. They're giving me no leeway. They're saying, hey, Christopher, look, life is unfair. Everyone that's here has to do the same stuff. Whether you like it or not, it's irrelevant. Figure it out. And I had enough chores, extra chores, to figure it out. Like I let my mouth run and get me in trouble. And then I had to deal with those consequences. And in a certain way, I'm grateful that I had those consequences, given the circumstance that I was in, right? No father around, a mother who committed suicide, being raised by an elderly grandmother who puts me in a boarding school. My back is against the wall. I have to learn to surrender my ego and get along with the environment that I'm in, whether I like it or not. And that's why I said earlier, you can put me in any situation, any country, any dynamic. I can gain satisfaction every day from how I'm being and from what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Yeah, I'm struck by sort of like the learning that your teenage self had to do that maybe your childhood didn't teach you. Sort of like in some ways you were sharing about the unpredictability of your mom's energy and mood. And so you're constantly navigating an unpredictable environment. And then in that, when you start to push back in like the 10th grade and you're in a system that has some pretty clear structures and boundaries, that they were able to communicate to you, here's what you can expect and here's where this is headed for you. And so you almost had like, instead of it being unpredictable, it was like extremely predictable. Now I can see what the edges of this are. I can see what the consequences of the like sort of natural consequences of my behavior. I know that there was enough like structure and order placed into the system so that you could understand how to navigate it and be successful at it, rather than sort of the unpredictableness of what your childhood taught you.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted, essentially, I wanted more freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And in order for me to get more freedom, I was going to have to bend the knee.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, I'm going to bend the knee. And after I bent the knee, then everything really worked out. It worked out really, really well after that.
Beautiful.
Because I was no longer in the blame game.
Mm-hmm.
These are my circumstances. I'm in an institution that is, there's 1,000 other students that come from similar backgrounds, right? And some of them seem to want to get along and get the most out of the situation that they're in.
Mm-hmm.
And I put up a decent fight.
That's what being a teenager is all about.
I put up a decent fight, and I'm lucky I woke up. And look, I was fortunate where I had someone who I was attracted to in school, and she was pretty much honest at all times, and she told me the things that I'd never wanted to hear, and I had to deal with those. And I decided that the things that I wanted were more important than saying F you to the system. And she got me to understand that the system was there to support me.
Hmm. I love that you got such a clear, positive message from that. I don't know that everybody that goes to boarding school feels that way. And so I love that it actually offered you the thing that you needed that maybe your childhood didn't give you.
No, I know. Yeah, I mean, it offered me some different options.
Yeah.
Okay, because here's the thing about me is that I know for sure that if I was raised in the household with my grandmother, it would have been very simple for me because my grandmother knew what I was like, and instinctually she knew to always give me space. And so I would have been better. I think I would have been better if I would have just been simply raised by my grandmother at home in a very poor household.
Hmm.
And even though I had all of these other um, opportunities for a powerful education, the environment was almost more important for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I made the best decision with the decisions that were made for me.
Yeah.
And um, I'm fortunate enough that I got what I got out of that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's impacted me to today.
Yeah.
No matter what, no matter how I feel about my day or how I'm feeling internally, I still have the ability to show up and serve other people powerfully and serve myself powerfully. So that served me to go into the military and make the most out of that situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted a challenge, and I knew that SEAL training in the SEAL teams would challenge me to the next level.
Just a small challenge.
Yeah. A, a little bit. And
Uh-huh.
they kept their promise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad you're going to that part of your life because I'd love to hear some of the powerful lessons that you took from your time as a Navy SEAL.
Everyone who goes to SEAL training has their own challenge, right? And some guys, they run slow. Other guys, they swim slow. Other guys, their mental aptitude um, is insufficient for them to get through the program. And look, the attrition rate is like 92%. So what's that mean? It means that out of every 100 guys that show up at the door, that knock on the door to get in, 92 are being sent home.
Mm-hmm.
So, the program is designed to help you find your own inner deficiency. And everyone has an inner deficiency. Everyone has a different motivation who wants to complete. And regardless of your motivation, you all have to go through the same things the same way that I experienced in boarding school. So there's this universal requirement for everyone. So there's no getting over. No matter how charming you are, how funny you are, how smart you are, yeah, you're still going to get pushed to your edge. And you're going to have to figure out in the middle of that discomfort, am I going to quit or am I going to address this head on? And I had two challenges. One, I was very lean. And so I kept getting full blown hypothermia. So my core temperature was dropping to 87 degrees.
Mm.
And that's quite cold. Okay. And the other thing is that because I grew up in a household with a mother who was emotionally aggressive verbally, I had to deal with instructors who spoke really loud and really fast and were really sharp with their words, how that put me into a fight or flight state. So both of those situations would drop me into that fight or flight response. Okay. So I would be in a cold stupor almost every single day. So that means I'm so cold, I can barely even think. Okay. And in SEAL training, their job is to put you in an uncomfortable situation, see how you're going to respond, because they need to know what kind of decision maker are you when you're cold, when you're wet, and you're miserable. Anyone can make a decision sitting on the beach in Maui.
It's a bit
Okay,
easier.
right. In the springtime, anyone can make a fabulous decision. Okay. But when your core temperature is 87 degrees, okay, you're full of sand, you're extremely hungry, and your body's shaking like a leaf on a cold, windy winter's day, what are you going to do?
Mm.
How are you going to respond? And fortunate for me, even though I was lean, I still had a brain that worked pretty sufficiently, and I could make good decisions. And once I was put in a leadership role in SEAL training in my SEAL team class, it gave me the opportunity to have these other aspects of myself show up. And so whenever I get into let's say I'm taking a 5-day course and they're looking for someone to get into a leadership role, I'm all too willing to hop into that role because I know I get the most out of myself when I put myself in a position to lead others.
Mm.
The best aspects of me show up when I'm in a leadership role versus the follow role.
Mm-hmm.
And SEAL training and the SEAL teams is very consistent with what they require. And what they require is 100%, 110% effort every single day, all day long, all month long, all year long. So there are no moments where you get to sit back and go, oh, poor me. You never get to address that because in that environment, it's unacceptable. Because who wants to be in the field? Who wants to be on an operation and someone's complaining about the blister on the outside of their right heel and all 15 other guys have blisters
Mm-hmm.
and we have another 14 kilometers that we have to hike in to this direct action crossroad.
Mm.
Like, who wants to hear that? So there's no complaining, there's no whining, there's no bitching, and there's no moaning. And you have to deal with your own discomfort at an internal, mental, emotional level. And you have to be present on the outside, which means you need to be present on the inside. So little things that would cause other people to say, hey, I've had enough, are things that motivate us to actually give more as opposed to show up less.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I'm working with someone who is or who has been through some very horrific childhood experience. And I'm willing to go into the middle of their pain with them. And when they offload these tears or they offload this anger, I can sit in the middle of their anger, in the middle of their sadness, in the middle of their hopelessness, in the middle of their depression with them. And I make it okay for them to be vulnerable, to be transparent, and to be emotionally honest with what they're experiencing. And I give them time to soothe themselves, and I give them space to soothe themselves while simultaneously letting them know that, hey, I'm right here. And yet I know you need to walk this mile of your journey on your own. Yet I'm standing right beside you. And I think that level of inner confidence at an emotional and a psychological level is a potent antidote for the deeper levels of stress, insecurity, fears, and limiting beliefs that people have been wound into from a very young age and are desiring to separate from so that they can grow into the person that they came here to be, which is to simply understand that everything is what it is. And we have this opportunity to have you experience your own love through allowing somebody else to attach to the place where you feel most vulnerable, which is your childhood pain.
Mm. It's a really powerful space that you hold for people. I think that for many of us, that the depths and the intensity of our grief, of our rage, of our hopelessness can feel really isolating, can feel like we are alone in it, and it will overwhelm us and consume us and destroy us. And yet to have somebody that has the confidence to be able to move in that space and to sit there, to not do it for the person, to not enmesh with the person and get lost in it, but to sit there present with that firmness and calmness and confidence while somebody walks that part of their journey, I think is super transformative, because it teaches us that even in the hopelessness, we're not alone. Even in the darkness, we have someone there with us. It's a really powerful space that you hold, and I'm glad you sort of learned how to be in that as a result of the training of your life, the education. There's two things you were sharing that I wanted to highlight from what you were talking about, where you said something around the leadership role is where you find the best parts of you come forward. I love that, and I want to highlight that because I think in some ways we get to see a lot of examples out there in the world, in our politics and the way that companies are led, that where people lead and maybe the not so great aspects of them come out, the sort of greed or the selfishness or the power hunger, or we get to see a lot of examples of that out in the world where it doesn't necessarily bring out the best in someone. But I love to highlight that stepping into a leadership role can bring out the best in us, can help us be more of service, can help us be more authentically ourselves, and not necessarily just a negative. So thanks for saying it in that way, because I had not heard someone really kind of articulate something like that. And I think it's important to see examples of where people stepping into leadership can be really the best thing for the situation, rather than something that's going to create more havoc or more challenge for a lot of people.
Yeah, when I was in SEAL training, the instructors in every phase of training, there's 4 phases. There's pre-training, there's first phase, second phase, and third phase. And when you're going through that process, the instructors are repeating over and over and over, there's no I in team. And when you get to the SEAL teams, you understand why they continue to keep repeating that, because there's only 16 guys in the platoon. That's a small, very small number of men. And there's a lot of departments in a SEAL team platoon that have to be taken care of. And so there's 2 guys per department. And each guy needs to lead in his own department. And because you have all these different leaders in all these different departments, we understand that we're a platoon together, and what's required is that each guy leads in his own way. So there's no one ever looking over your shoulder.
That's really powerful to recognize that in leadership, we also don't, leadership can be really connected to the we, to the team, to the, to the collective. So many, as I was saying, so many of our examples can look like ego, leading from an ego place and from a dominance and power over kind of way. But to know that you can lead in your own authentic way and still stay really connected to the collective is really powerful. The other thing I wanted to draw you out on, because it was sort of what we were talking about initially in the beginning around men being willing to look back at some of their blueprints or some of the ways that they were imprinted on in their relationships. You were sharing that you grew up with a mom that was loud and emotionally charged in the way that she approached you. And you noticed that had an impact on your childhood nervous system.
For sure.
That it created that fight or flight response that would react to that because of the way she would show up. And then you're in Navy SEAL training and they speak in not the same way, but in a similarly intense sort of fashion, which triggers the nervous system again based on a previous experience. That's exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about men being willing to look back is that the things that are playing out in our current lives are often some form of something we've experienced in the past and ways that our nervous system has learned to relate to the world. And we can try to navigate just the one thing that's happening to us that might be putting us in fight or flight, that might have some impact to de-stress the current moment. But oftentimes there's patterns and habits around that our bodies and our nervous systems take on. And so if we actually look backwards, we can have, it's more bang for the buck. You can get to the actual root of it rather than just sort of treating that momentary symptom of fight or flight. So I wanted to highlight that because it's such a perfect example of where unconsciously our past gets brought into our present and we're sort of navigating both the adult self and the child self in that same moment.
Yeah, I mean, the work that I do with people, is exactly that. Because without someone going through a deep investigation with you from a position of neutrality, it makes it very difficult for most humans to understand how the past is impacting their present day to day, right? My experience is this. People who are very focused on the future have a lot of stuff that's unresolved in their past. And the goal of my work is to get the person in the present day to day. And in order to do that, we have to go back and resolve the stressors, well, let's say the excessive negative stressors, the traumas, the distortions, the limiting beliefs, the insecurities, and the inner deficiencies that we picked up from mom and dad. Mm-hmm. And as we start to resolve those, then guess what happens is the person's future starts moving closer towards the present day to day. Because you've got the past here and you've got the future here, right? And people are either way back here or they're way over here. So what's the solution? The solution is very simple. Everything you resolve in the past will allow your future-minded self to come back to the present. And then you can eventually, as you resolve enough of that, you have an opportunity to experience the now. And in the now is where the magic begins, because now your nervous system is operating out of a state of stillness. And so you have an increased amount of awareness. You have access to more light. You're more awake and you're much more conscious. Mm-hmm. And imagine if I'm awake, I'm conscious, I'm enlightened, and I'm aware, what kind of impact am I going to have on the world around me? The impact is going to be immediate and profound everywhere I go and everything that I do, because now I'm a fully conscious, amalgamated being who's able to meet people where they're truly at and elevate them to where they really want to be. And what could be more powerful than that?
Totally. It reminds me, the doorway that I use to take people into that awareness around their nervous system and where it's operating from is I do a version of coaching that involves horses. And so I put people in a round pen with a horse that doesn't have the normal control mechanisms attached to them. And part of their survival mechanism is to be a very sensitive creature in the world that can feel different things and respond to how our respiration rate, our muscle tension, our heart rate, our hormone production. And so they're constantly like an external barometer of what's playing out on the inside. And I think oftentimes many of us discount that what's happening on the inside is not impacting the external environment. And yet what I get to see, what my clients get to see, what I've seen is that when you stand in a room with a horse who has its own free will and choice, you will notice the impact of your nervous system greatly as you step into that space, as you engage in that relationship. And then you get to reflect on what's creating that, where does that come from, create some shifts, see how it changes the impact on the external environment. So I'm glad you're bringing this piece up, because I think so often we think some of the stressful thoughts in our head or the rumination or the fight or flight response that's happening in us, we can mask it and just show up in the world without it impacting the external environment. And I just know that to be so not true based on what I've seen with my work with my clients. And so I'd love to hear more from you about, like, what do you see as a professional? What are you seeing as some of the sort of major consequences of people living in fight or flight or in their stress response?
Pain in their body, right? So there's 4 levels of pain. You've got spiritual pain, you have emotional pain, you have physical, structural pain, physiological pain, and you have psychological pain. And the most obvious markers that someone is in pain is their level of addiction to the daily acceptable drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And the daily acceptable drugs would be nicotine, caffeine, alcohol, refined sugar, brown and white, and organic sugar cane, marijuana, pharmaceuticals, and recreational drugs.
Could we also put in there things like social media, television, those kinds of things?
No, because those are things, those are choices that people make based on their addiction to substance.
Got it. Okay.
Right. And so once you resolve someone's addiction to substance, then what happens is their relationship with those things changes.
Oh,
Now, for children who were, let's say, adults who were much younger than you and I, they were raised on those social media platforms,
yeah.
right? I happen to be old enough to be frustrated with my ability to surf those things successfully. So I kind of avoid them
yeah.
in a certain way. Like, yeah, I may go to Facebook every once in a blue moon, and then or LinkedIn or Instagram or Twitter. But you know what? They never bring enough satisfaction to me.
Totally.
Right. Now, YouTube, where I can geek out on information, for sure. I can go down a rabbit hole and investigate stress, and those kinds of things are really fun for me. But for me to receive feedback from people that I don't know, it always feels empty. Right. I want feedback from people whose lives I'm impacting powerfully, because it has substance to it. It means something to me.
Mm-hmm.
So, when people are in pain, my experience is that they get used to the discomfort, and then they believe that that's a normal way of functioning. And then eventually it turns into a chronic symptom that they now find it very difficult to get away from, even for a moment. And at that point, the person becomes really vulnerable, and are willing to bend the knee and to look into their past. Until that moment comes, most people want to continue to keep getting on with what they're doing and how they've been doing it without holding up a mirror. Because who wants to spend time, honestly, like holding up a mirror if they think everything in their life is absolutely wonderful? And until they get to the point where the pendulum has swung as far left and as far right as it can, they will continue to deal with intermittent symptoms and they'll be fine with them.
Yeah.
I'm happy when they've reached that extreme moment, because now I know they're going to reach out for help.
Yeah, I think that's true of all people, but I think since we're having a conversation around masculinity and men's stuff, like I think it's even true, like very true for men, that most of us, part of our socialization, what makes us strong men is our resilience and our ability to just like tough it out, handle a lot of stress, and to normalize that as part of the lived experience. And so it does take extreme pain at one of those 4 levels or multiple of those 4 levels before most of us bend the knee and ask for help.
Yeah. Most men are unwilling to bend the knee. Okay. Until, guess what? They find out that, I went to the doc. He asked me to come back a few days later. They drew some blood. He wants my wife to come in with me down to the office, and he breaks the news: I've got prostate cancer. And then men are like, oh my God, what do I do now? And now they're receptive. Until then, they're usually rejected, because their job, right, the things that they're doing are informing them that they have value. And most men get their value from what they do as opposed to who they are. Totally. Right? Because men have been focused on things and women have been fortunate enough to be focused on relationships. So they have to be focused on the way that they're being. And the fun thing for me is this, is once a man receives feedback from the universe, from the world around him, from his environment, that he's in need of help, he suddenly gets to shift his doing into being. And then every man that has that experience, especially the younger they are, and the more often they have that experience, the more they shift into a greater state of balance, right? So when you have men who move around the world that are resilient, yet simultaneously self-introspective and emotionally honest with themselves and their environment around them, they get to live a more fuller life.
Yes. You are speaking my language here. That's what we're hoping to help create in this podcast and the work that I'm doing. You are speaking my language for sure. If a guy does get to that point where he is feeling like he needs to ask for help, he's hit that point where he's finally ready to bend the knee and he reaches out to you, what might be the biggest piece of advice you have for someone who's in that much pain? Or what's the biggest go-to thing that you offer to people when they're at that point in their lives?
The way that people find me is through my book or through a friend, and they have a couple hoops they have to jump through first, and then we get on a connection call. And the most important thing for me with any man that's in that situation is to let them know, look, everything's going to be okay. I've been where you're at. And it's really simple. And then I investigate. Why are you here? What can I do to serve you today? And then I give them that opportunity to speak. And I basically am in the background on the phone or on a Zoom, nodding my head. Okay. Letting them know that I acknowledge that they have value. I get it. I see their frustrations. And I'm here to serve them. And I think by opening up to space and acknowledging how much value they have, they feel like there's rapport going on between us, and they start dropping the ego immediately. And they drop into telling me what's been going on. And then I ask some very simple questions like, where do you think this all started? And now they go right back to the beginning and they start breaking things down. And I go, okay, I get it. This makes sense. Men, from my experience, simply need to know that other men have been through what they've been through. And then they're all too willing to be receptive. Right. And I'm in a good position because I'm a former US Navy SEAL. And who could be more resilient, right? Who could be more publicly seen as more masculine, more determined, more focused, more clear, more objective driven than a Navy SEAL? Mm-hmm. Because that's what our life is about.
Yeah.
And once a man gets on the phone with me and they know I'm willing to be receptive, that I've been through what they've been through, they're willing to bend the knee because they know that I've bent the knee and they've already read my book. Mm-hmm. Now, if I meet someone on a plane, knows nothing about me, all I simply do is listen. Mm-hmm. Like, hey, man, what's going on? You seem a little bit stressed. Well, I got this going on and that going on, and okay, and I listen. I open my ear and I listen, and I acknowledge how important they are, and then I may give them little bits of advice, like, "Hey, this conversation you're having with me might be a good idea to have with your dad. I think he'd really appreciate it." Really? Yeah, I think if you were to bend a knee in front of your dad, I think he might be able to bend the knee. Like, think about what it was like for your dad who was born in 1940. Oh, I didn't think about that. Imagine what the world was like then. Oh, yeah. So I think it'd be good if you called your dad, maybe tonight or tomorrow. Yeah, you know what? I think I'm going to do that. And I think simply inviting them to take a risk, right? An emotional risk, which is to let someone in on what they're suffering from. And I tell them, look, find a friend, somebody you trust that'll simply listen. I think once they know that that's okay, and they have that experience with their dad or with their brother or with their college friend, their college roommate, now they can have that with anyone. All men need to know is that they have a right to do it, and two, that once they do it, they'll be successful at it. They're going to do it again and again. Men are intelligent creatures. Women have had the benefit of having mothers that teach them how to be women. Mothers rarely ever teach their sons how to be feminine. And because that has been left out for most men out of their training, they find it very difficult to be receptive, and they lean on stoicism as a means of their primary way of relating emotionally when they're overwhelmed. And that is the biggest challenge to the growth of the masculine.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. And I just appreciate that you're highlighting that piece around, because it's what I find in my work when I've done men's collective groups is most men are actually really craving some intimacy and vulnerability. They just don't, they need to be given permission first. And usually once the first man's willing to bend the knee, the rest of them follow around with it because it gives that permission structure. And so what I love that sort of invitation that you offer to that person that's on the plane, that guy that's on the plane that you're telling, talk to your dad. Like, we can also lead by being the first to bend the knee. We don't have to wait for others. Some of us will be able to lead in that way. Some of us will need others to do it first. But there's sort of an invitation that this is where we're headed, and this is where the new masculine starts to really flourish, is when we are willing to bend the knee, when we are willing to be emotionally vulnerable, when we take that risk that many of us were taught not to take growing up in our training. But now we have the opportunity to do that, to add to our tool belt rather than to subtract from it. So I really appreciate that. And I think that's a really wonderful place for us to like sort of leave our conversation off. If people wanted to find out how to work with you, wanted to sort of jump through those hoops you acknowledged in order to work with you, how might they find you out there in the world?
The easiest way is to go to truebodyintelligence.com. And on truebodyintelligence.com, there's some information. It's written in a way that is outside of language that people are used to, because I had to create an understanding around all of this that was unique. And order the book, read the book, and or listen to the book. The audiobook is great. And then get in contact with me at support at truebodyintelligence.com. And Christina will respond to your email, and we'll get on a call, and we'll see how I can serve you.
Beautiful. I love that invitation to start. I think that a lot of men like that ability to like grab a book first and be able to read about something first before committing to actually taking that emotional risk with another human being. So I think I like that there's sort of that door, that first step, and then there's another step, which allows people to actually do the work that you're talking about in there. Thank you so much, Christopher, for joining me, for sharing your insights from what your training from life has taught you. You have a really powerful story, and I love that what it's taught you is how to be more present with people and to lean into those spaces that most people avoid or most people lean away from. So I'm so glad. While I hate that you had to go through some of your challenging experiences, I'm so glad they taught you how to be that confident, still presence when someone else needs it. So thank you for being that in the world and for offering your perspective to my audience.
Thank you. And we need people like you who are, one, educating themselves, standing in for children, willing to build a platform based on the data and information that you've collected from your own life, and invite people on like me so that we can have powerful co-creative conversations that inspire other men to realize that, hey, there's this whole other aspect to you that is desiring investigation, attention, and affection, and building a safe platform for people to be able to get enough courage to take a risk is what the world is in need of right now. So thank you for doing what you're doing too.
I appreciate that. Thank you. It's an honor and a privilege. If people want to get in contact with me, you can go to my website at travisstock.com. You can follow me on Instagram at Travers03. It's where some of the ongoing conversations around the new masculine are going. So if you want to continue participating, go there. And if you're enjoying the mission of this podcast and want to become a supporter, please go to patreon.com/thenewmasculine. Thank you so much, Christopher, for joining me. And until our next episode.